Today is part 2 of ranking every NBA MVP, from Bob Pettit to Joel Embiid, based on how their careers played out. This is part 2, so if you missed part 1, go ahead and catch up, as today we're going to be going over rankings 27 through 19. But before we start ranking these players, don't forget to like and subscribe for part 3. Now let's get started. At number 27, I have Steve Nash. Nash could honestly be 5 spots lower, and I would be perfectly fine with that. He won 2 MVPs in his career, in 2005 and 2006, and there are strong cases to be made that Nash didn't deserve either of them. Only Wes Unseld had worse counting stats as an MVP, and it's not like Nash was better than average on defense. But, to make a quick case for Nash, the reason why he won MVP wasn't because of his counting stats. Sometimes your impact on the court can be determined in multiple ways, and Nash's impact was through setting up the pieces around him to be better. In 2004, the year before Nash arrived on the Suns, their record was 29-53, and they were last in their division. In 2005, the year Nash came to the Suns, their record was 62-20, and they were first in the West. While Nash didn't have a prime like Harden or Iverson, his consistency as one of the best playmakers in the league, while leading teams to top seeds in the West every season, has to be appreciated in this ranking. Again, you could rank him below Iverson or Harden on this list, and I really wouldn't mind it. At number 26, I have Russell Westbrook. Westbrook has had one of the most interesting careers out of everyone on this list. He started his career as a second fiddle in OKC behind Kevin Durant, and he made the finals in 2012, his 4th season in the league, but ultimately lost in 5 to the LeBron-led Heat. But still, the future looked bright in OKC, as Russ and KD, alongside 6th-man James Harden, were all under the age of 25. But then, OKC's front office traded James Harden to the Rockets, and the rest was history. The Thunder didn't make it to the finals again, and KD eventually left the Thunder in 2016 to join the Warriors. We already saw a full season of Westbrook as a main star when KD went down in 2014, and the results were promising. And in Westbrook's first full-time season as a number 1 option, he didn't disappoint. In 2017, Westbrook became the first player since Oscar Robertson to average a triple-double for the entire season, and he was rewarded MVP honors. But since then, the story of Westbrook's career has been this: great regular season stats, but nothing to show for it in the postseason. If Westbrook got over the hump and won a title, he'd likely be 4 to 5 spots higher on this list. But I can't put him higher than other proven MVPs who have been the top options on championship-level teams. At number 25, I have David Robinson. Robinson was drafted to the San Antonio Spurs in 1987, but didn't play until 1989 because he had to finish service with the US Navy. But when Robinson debuted in 1989, he was an unstoppable force, averaging a 24-12 with 4 blocks a game. He continued at this pace, being the anchor the Spurs desperately needed, and eventually peaked in 1995, where he won his MVP, averaging a 28-11 while leading the Spurs to a 62-20 record. Flash forward 2 years later, and Robinson played only 6 games in the 1997 season due to injury, but luckily for the Spurs, the 1997 draft had a star big man from Wake Forest named Tim Duncan waiting for them. And just 2 years later, Duncan led 34-year-old Robinson and the Spurs to their first title in franchise history. Robinson played until he was 37 and was still a dominant defender in the paint during that time. He ended his career as a 10-time All-NBA selection, an 8-time All-Defensive selection, which included a Defensive Player of the Year in 1992, and was the league's leading scorer in 1994, rebounds leader in 1991, and blocks leader in 1992. Robinson was a great leader and provided elite-level scoring and defense to a team that never won less than 47 games in a season while he was healthy. At number 24, I have Charles Barkley. While many know Barkley for his work on Inside the NBA, in his prime, Barkley was an unstoppable post player. He led the league in 2-point field goal percentage 5 years in a row while taking almost 16 shots a game. He averaged over 10 rebounds a game from 1985 to 2000 and was an underrated playmaker, averaging over 4 assists a game for 11 seasons. But ultimately, I have to ask a what if for Barkley's career, and it's not because of anything he did wrong. The 76ers organization constantly set up Barkley for failure by making terrible roster decisions, like trading the number 1 overall pick in 1986 for Roy Hinson, who was off the team a year later, and $750,000 cash. Barkley didn't have a great supporting cast around him until he forced a trade to the Suns in 1992, but at that point in his career, Barkley was already 30 and winding down. Still, Barkley led the Suns to a top seed in the West in 1993 and won MVP honors, averaging a 26, 12, and 5. Barkley had an amazing individual career. The only things holding him back are 1, his absolutely atrocious defense, and number 2, not having a title. Despite this, Barkley is still known as one of the greatest post players and rebounders in NBA history, and for me, is one of the top 30 NBA players ever. At number 23, I have Bob Pettit. Now, I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of comments asking why I ranked Pettit, who played in the 50s and 60s against milkmen and plumbers, higher than Russell Westbrook and James Harden. But hear me out. Yes, if Pettit were in the NBA today, he would likely not be as effective as he was. But when comparing players all time to one another, you have to look at other factors, like how dominant they were in their era. Besides, all sports evolve, and players from the early history of the sport are always going to be inferior to the players of today. So when you look back at Pettit from the perspective of the 1950s, he was a dominant post player, a multiple-time MVP, and one of the only men to ever defeat Bill Russell and the Boston Celtics in the NBA Finals. His career averages sit at 26 points and 16 rebounds a game, and he's one of the only players ever to have made an All-NBA team every season he was in the league. Why Pettit isn't higher is because, number 1, he wasn't a great defender, and number 2, he didn't make the finals again after his only title in 1958. At number 22, I have Bob Koozie. Koozie gets the edge over Pettit because while there are other big men better than Pettit when he played, there was no guard better than Koozie. Koozie was and still is one of the greatest passers ever, leading the NBA in assists 8 seasons in a row while putting up 19 to 21 points a game. He won the 1957 MVP, averaging a 21, 8, and 5, and finished his career a 6-time NBA champion and 13-time All-Star. Koozie ultimately revolutionized the game of basketball, as there was no ball handler before him who scored and passed the ball like he did. It's hard to rank him any higher than this because his defense was fine but not that good, and he was on a team with one of the 10 greatest players ever for the majority of his career, which makes me wonder if the playoff success would be there if Russell wasn't there. At number 21, I have Kevin Garnett. Garnett is the ultimate high-effort energy guy that can boost your team with an electric dunk or block. His athleticism translated on both sides of the ball, as Garnett was a great finisher at the rim and could defend almost any player you assigned him to. Add that with a high motor and a decent mid-range jumper, and Garnett was unstoppable in the early 2000s, peaking in 2004 where Garnett won his only MVP, averaging a 24, 14, and 5. The reason why Garnett isn't higher is because the early part of his career is a little bit of a what-if. Similar to Charles Barkley in Philadelphia, Garnett was set up for failure in Minnesota, as his only All-Star teammate in the first 11 years of his career was Sam Cassell. Eventually, Garnett had enough and asked for a trade, which was ultimately granted, and in his first season with the Celtics in 2008, he won a title. But at that point, Garnett was 31 and past the best seasons of his career. While power forwards like Tim Duncan and Dirk Nowitzki somewhat overshadowed the greatness of prime Kevin Garnett in Minnesota, it's great to see in 2023 that many are now recognizing Garnett and his ability to dominate both sides of the ball. At number 20, I have Giannis Antetokounmpo. Giannis, like a couple other players on this list, is still in the prime of his career and continues to improve every passing year. But in his 10 seasons in the NBA, he's already made 7 All-NBA teams, 5 All-Defensive teams, won 2 MVPs, a Defensive Player of the Year, and an NBA title. A resume through 10 years of your career doesn't get much better than that. But what sets Giannis apart from all the other superstars in the league today is his will to win. It feels like there's nothing that can stop a fully healthy Giannis from achieving his goal, and that's to win another NBA title for Milwaukee. The only hole in Giannis' game is shooting, and during the 2021 title run, he was actually a threat from mid-range and occasionally from the 3. But this past season, all that progress seems to have regressed. If Giannis can come into next season with a consistent jumper that keeps the opposing defense in check, I could see a world where Giannis has ring number 2 this time next year. At number 19, I have Nikola Jokic. Call me crazy or say I have recency bias, but Jokic just had one of the greatest statistical playoff runs we've ever seen. In the history of the NBA, there has never been a big man so dominant in every aspect of the game like Jokic is. He's one of the only players in NBA history that can beat you in every way possible, and as we've seen this past season, as long as he has a competent supporting cast around him, he guarantees a top seed and a deep playoff run. Only a handful of players in NBA history can say that. In just 8 years in the NBA, Jokic has 5 All-NBA appearances, 2 MVPs, and a championship ring. And yes, you could say that Giannis should be ahead of Jokic because Giannis is an elite defender, while Jokic is just average. and I can't deny that, but I can also raise the argument that Jokic is a more complete player than Giannis, considering that Jokic is a great mid-range jumper, shoots 38% from 3, and averages almost 10 assists a night. Again, the Jokic-Giannis argument is super close, but for now, I believe Jokic is a greater player. It's still worth keeping an eye on these two players for the next 5 to 10 seasons, as this has the potential to be the greatest debate between two players of the same era since Bird and Magic. That's all for this video. Remember to like and subscribe for part 3 of this series.